April 10, 1943. Naval Air Station, Quonset Point, Rhode Island. The teletype machine clattered out an urgent message from Pacific Fleet Headquarters. Japanese night harassment increasing. Guadalcanal reports severe troop exhaustion from sleep deprivation. Fleet requires immediate countermeasures. Establish night fighter capability priority 1. Lieutenant Commander William J. Widhelm reviewed the orders establishing VFN 75, the United States Navy's first dedicated night fighter squadron. 18 pilots, 6 ground officers, 30 enlisted men. Of the pilots, only 5 had instrument flying experience. 3 had checked out in Corsairs. The rest had flown nothing more advanced than SNJ trainers. What began as a desperate response to Japanese nocturnal harassment would evolve into the most revolutionary transformation in carrier aviation history. Within 18 months, American night fighters would achieve such complete dominance that Japanese pilots would choose certain death in daylight over facing the invisible hunters that ruled the darkness. The Pacific War had exposed a critical vulnerability in American naval aviation. Since August 1942, Japanese aircraft had perfected a simple but devastating tactic. Single aircraft, often antiquated float planes, would appear over American positions throughout the night. The pilots deliberately desynchronized their engines, creating a distinctive thrumming sound that earned them the nickname Washing Machine Charlie from exhausted Marines on Guadalcanal. Sometimes they dropped bombs, sometimes just flares. Often they simply circled for hours, engines droning, keeping thousands of men awake and degrading combat effectiveness through systematic sleep deprivation. The Imperial Japanese Navy had recognized early that they could not match American industrial production or daylight fighter performance. Their response was tactical innovation that weaponized the night itself. Japanese naval aviators underwent rigorous screening for night vision capability from the moment of recruitment. The best were assigned to specialized units flying obsolete aircraft that would have been death traps in daylight, but became psychological weapons in darkness. Against this threat, American forces were effectively helpless. Army Air Force P-70 night fighters had reached Guadalcanal in February 1943, but proved inadequate, their ceiling too low, their radar primitive, their effectiveness minimal. The solution emerged from an unlikely collaboration between naval officers and civilian scientists at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Radiation Laboratory. Project Affirm, established in April 1942 under Commander W.E.G. Taylor, had been working to adapt British radar technology for naval aviation use. The breakthrough came with development of the AN/APS-4 and later AN/APS-6 airborne intercept radar, marvels of miniaturization that compressed ship-based radar capabilities into pods small enough to mount on single-seat fighters. The AN/APS-6 represented a quantum leap in capability. Operating at 3.2 centimeters wavelength, it could detect fighter-sized targets at 4 miles and track them to within 50 yards. The system offered 2 modes: search, where targets appeared as dots on a 2-inch display showing range and bearing, and gunsight, which provided precise steering cues for weapons employment. But the technology was only part of the equation. Flying and fighting in absolute darkness required complete reimagining of fighter tactics developed over decades of daylight combat. The aircraft selected for modification was initially the Vought F-4U Corsair. 34 F-4U-2 variants were produced by field modification at Naval Aircraft Factory Philadelphia and Naval Air Station San Diego, with radar equipment installed in a streamlined fairing on the starboard wing. The cockpit was extensively modified with red lighting to preserve night vision, additional instruments for blind flying, and the radar scope positioned where the pilot could monitor it while maintaining aircraft control. Later, the Grumman F-6F Hellcat would become the primary night fighter, with F-6F-3N and F-6F-5N variants eventually dominating carrier operations. Training for night combat pushed human capabilities to extraordinary limits. At the newly established Night Fighter Training Unit at Naval Auxiliary Air Facility Charlestown, Rhode Island, instructors recreated carrier operations in complete darkness. Runways were marked with dim lights simulating carrier decks. Arresting gear stretched across concrete. From sunset to sunrise, the entire base operated in blackout conditions. Pilots learned to trust instruments when every instinct screamed danger, to interpret radar returns while flying complex intercept patterns, to land on simulated carrier decks guided only by barely visible signals. The washout rate exceeded 60%. Those who survived emerged as a new breed of naval aviator, capable of operating in conditions that experienced pilots considered suicidal. Lieutenant John Phillips, an engineering graduate who had abandoned Bell Laboratories for naval aviation, explained the challenge to new students. Forget everything you know about dogfighting. At night, there are no second chances. The pilot who sees first, shoots first, survives. The one who hesitates, dies. On October 31, 1943, Lieutenant Hugh D. O'Neill, Jr. made history. Flying from Munda, New Georgia, he intercepted a Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bomber 12 miles southeast of the Shortland Islands. It was the first victory for VFN-75 and proved that radar-equipped fighters could successfully engage enemy aircraft in total darkness. The psychological impact on both sides was immediate. Japanese aircrew, who had operated with impunity for over a year, suddenly faced an invisible threat. American forces, tormented by nightly harassment, finally had an effective defense. The expansion of night fighter capabilities accelerated rapidly. VFN-76 commissioned on February 1, 1944, followed by VFN-77, VFN-78, and additional squadrons that would eventually number 14. Each unit developed tactical innovations shared through detailed after-action reports. What emerged was sophisticated doctrine that transformed night fighting from desperate improvisation to precise science. Lieutenant Commander Richard E. Harmer, commanding VFN-101, demonstrated the evolution during the Marshall Islands campaign. On the night of January 29, 1944, his squadron deployed from USS Enterprise flying F-4U-2 Corsairs, the first carrier-based night fighter combat mission. Near Truk, Harmer intercepted a Betty bomber using tactics impossible without radar. Instead of traditional pursuit, he climbed above the target, using altitude advantage to control the engagement. When he dove to attack, the Japanese crew never saw him coming. The bomber exploded after a single firing pass, victim to technology and tactics the Japanese could neither match nor counter. The technical challenges of carrier night operations were staggering. Landing on a pitching deck in daylight required exceptional skill. Performing the same task in darkness, guided only by dim lights and landing signal officer paddles, pushed pilots beyond normal human limits. Initial accident rates exceeded 30%. Barriers failed to stop aircraft that missed arresting wires. Crashed aircraft turned flight decks into infernos. But procedures evolved rapidly. Pilots developed precise communication protocols, calling out altitude and distance to maintain spacing without visual reference. Fuel minimums were established. Any aircraft with less than 200 pounds remaining would ditch alongside destroyers rather than risk a deck crash. Japanese attempts to counter American night fighters revealed the depth of their technological deficit. Intelligence reports intercepted by Fleet Radio Unit Pacific documented emergency conferences where senior naval aviators debated responses. Some advocated abandoning night operations entirely. Others proposed primitive radar warning receivers that might detect American fighters. But Japan's electronics industry, already strained by wartime demands, could not match American production. While Westinghouse alone manufactured over 2,000 radar sets, Japanese firms managed fewer than 50 airborne units during the entire war, most too unreliable for combat use. The transformation accelerated with introduction of the F-6F-3N Hellcat in early 1944. More stable than the Corsair and with better deck handling characteristics, the Hellcat proved ideal for night carrier operations. Squadrons developed new tactics exploiting radar capabilities. Radar picket positioned fighters at specific points, creating invisible barriers through which no enemy aircraft could pass undetected. Hunter-killer teams used one fighter to track targets while another maintained visual lookout. Ship-based fighter directors learned to vector multiple intercepts simultaneously, stacking fighters at different altitudes to create impenetrable defensive screens. Commander Turner Caldwell represented the next evolutionary leap. A visionary who had lobbied persistently for dedicated night carrier operations, Caldwell argued that mixing day and night fighters on conventional carriers compromised both. His solution was revolutionary: convert an entire carrier exclusively for night operations. On August 15, 1944, his vision materialized when Night Air Group 41 embarked aboard USS Independence, the world's first dedicated night carrier. The conversion was comprehensive. Independence received additional radar systems providing unprecedented situational awareness. Flight deck lighting was reconfigured for minimal visibility. Maintenance schedules inverted, with primary operations in darkness and repairs during daylight. The air group consisted of VFN-41 with 14 F-6F 5N Hellcats and VTN-41 with 12 radar-equipped TBM Avengers. Every aspect, from crew training to meal schedules, optimized for nocturnal operations. On September 12, 1944, Night Air Group 41 conducted its first offensive sweep over the Philippines. The mission profile was audacious: arrive over enemy territory at dusk, orbit airfields, and destroy any aircraft attempting night operations. Lieutenant William E. Henry led the fighter sweep, maintaining formation integrity through radar while navigating by dead reckoning. At 21:45 hours, his scope showed multiple contacts rising from Clark Field. The Japanese aircraft, expecting routine harassment missions, flew predictably. Henry's coordinated attack destroyed 6 aircraft in 3 minutes. Surviving Japanese pilots scattered in panic. Some collided in darkness. Others crashed attempting emergency landings without runway lights. By mission's end, Night Air Group 41 claimed 14 aerial victories and 20 ground kills without loss. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 demonstrated night fighters' strategic impact. As Japanese naval forces attempted their final decisive engagement, American night fighters flew continuous patrols preventing enemy reconnaissance. Lieutenant Edward Chastain of VFN-41 intercepted 3 scout planes searching for Task Force 38 on October 24th. Without accurate position reports, Japanese fleet elements blundered into uncoordinated engagements, resulting in catastrophic defeat. Night fighters had evolved from defensive necessities to offensive enablers. The technological sophistication continued advancing. The ANAPS-6A radar in late-war F-6F-5N fighters could detect targets at 6 miles and track multiple contacts simultaneously. IFF, identification friend or foe, systems prevented friendly fire incidents that had plagued early operations. VHF radios allowed precise communication between fighters and controllers hundreds of miles apart. Even small details mattered. Specially designed red goggles preserved night vision while allowing pilots to read instruments, while Japanese aviators improvised with makeshift solutions. Training programs reflected American industrial advantages. The Night Attack and Combat Training Unit at Charlestown graduated 50 pilots monthly. Instructors were combat veterans who returned from the Pacific to share expertise. Synthetic training devices, including primitive flight simulators, allowed practice without burning precious fuel. Meanwhile, Japanese training collapsed under fuel shortages and loss of experienced instructors. New pilots arrived at combat units with less than 100 hours total flight time, no night training, and obsolete aircraft lacking radar. Lieutenant Commander James S. Gray, commanding VFN 78, exemplified the new generation of night fighter tacticians. Operating from USS Intrepid, Gray developed the loose deuce formation, two fighters operating independently but within mutual support range. This seemingly simple innovation doubled coverage area while reducing collision risk. On August 31, 1944, Gray damaged a Betty bomber 90 miles east of Iwo Jima, beginning a campaign that would claim multiple victories for his squadron despite equipment limitations of early radar sets. The human dimension produced extraordinary stories of courage. Lieutenant Robert Blackwell of VFN 91 became separated from USS Yorktown during a typhoon on February 3, 1945. With radar malfunctioning and fuel critical, he navigated by dead reckoning through turbulence so severe it repeatedly slammed him against the canopy. After 3 hours, he detected a faint radar return that proved to be his carrier. He landed with less than 5 gallons remaining, his aircraft so damaged it never flew again. Japanese pilots displayed equal courage in increasingly hopeless circumstances. Ensign Yukio Sato, flying an obsolete Nakajima J-1N night fighter, engaged 4 Hellcats simultaneously on March 15, 1945. Though hopelessly outmatched, no radar, inferior performance, outnumbered, he damaged 1 American fighter before being shot down. His sacrifice allowed a reconnaissance aircraft to complete its mission. Such individual heroism could not overcome systematic technological inferiority, but it demonstrated the warrior spirit transcending material disadvantage. Night Air Group 90 replaced Air Group 41 aboard Enterprise in December 1944, representing further evolution in capabilities. Commanded by Lieutenant Commander William R. Winston, VFN 90, flew the newest F-6F-5N fighters with improved APS-6A radar. The squadron had completed over 3,000 practice intercepts at Barbers Point, Hawaii. Winston introduced revolutionary barrier patrol tactics, positioning fighters to create overlapping coverage zones, making penetration virtually impossible. On January 12, 1945, during operations supporting the Lingayen Gulf invasion, VFN 90 demonstrated complete American night supremacy. Multiple waves of Japanese aircraft attempted to attack the invasion fleet after dark. Winston's fighters, vectored by ship-based controllers using sophisticated radar plotting, achieved perfect positioning for every intercept. Lieutenant John Morris destroyed 3 bombers in a single pass, his 6 machine guns converging at precisely calculated range. Lieutenant William Levering shot down 2 torpedo bombers while flying below 100 feet altitude, using radar altimeter to avoid the ocean while tracking targets against sea clutter. The mathematics were devastating. That single night, American night fighters claimed 43 confirmed victories against 0 losses. Post-war Japanese records revealed that of 197 aircraft launched, only 34 returned operational. The psychological impact was crushing. Lieutenant Commander Susumu Kimura, one of few survivors, testified, "We could not see American fighters, but they saw us perfectly, like fighting ghosts with machine guns. The darkness we had mastered became our grave." Production statistics revealed the industrial chasm. Between March 1944 and August 1945, American factories produced over 26,000 ASB radar sets and 2,000 AN/APS-6 units. Japanese electronics firms managed fewer than 50 primitive airborne radars, most failing after minimal use. American carriers received continuous upgrades, improved radar, better radios, refined instruments. Japanese units cannibalized wrecked aircraft for spare parts, a downward spiral accelerating toward complete collapse. The broader naval campaign demonstrated night fighters' strategic value. Japanese inability to conduct reconnaissance meant American fleet movements remained concealed until attack commenced. This operational surprise contributed decisively to victories at Philippine Sea, where night fighters prevented Japanese scouts from locating Task Force 58 until the Marianas Turkey shoot was already underway. At Okinawa, continuous night fighter patrols rendered Japanese airfields unusable after dark, compressing enemy operations into daylight hours where they faced overwhelming American superiority. Maintenance crews deserved equal recognition for the night fighter revolution. Working in blacked-out hangars, they performed complex repairs by touch and dim red light. Radar technicians, a specialty created specifically for night fighters, troubleshot classified equipment without complete schematics. Their dedication achieved operational readiness rates exceeding daylight squadrons, despite radar complexity. Chief Aviation Electrician's mate Harold Patterson of VFN 41 exemplified this dedication, working 36 straight hours to repair battle damage, sleeping beside aircraft between launches. Weather emerged as unexpected ally. Japanese doctrine emphasized clear conditions for visual navigation. American radar-equipped fighters operated effectively in clouds, rain, and fog that grounded enemy aircraft. Several major raids were disrupted not by combat, but by weather that Americans penetrated while Japanese could not. The all-weather capability multiplied effective operational tempo, allowing continuous pressure regardless of conditions. Communication technology proved equally vital. TBS talk between ships' radio allowed fighter directors to coordinate multiple intercepts simultaneously. Data links transmitted radar information between ships, creating shared tactical pictures. Voice procedures, standardized fleet-wide, reduced confusion and increased efficiency. The electromagnetic spectrum had become another battlefield where American superiority in electronics provided decisive advantage. Individual squadrons developed unique innovations. VFN 91, operating from USS Hornet, pioneered intruder missions, single fighters penetrating Japanese airspace to attack aircraft during takeoff and landing. These missions required extraordinary navigation skills, as pilots flew hundreds of miles over water in darkness to arrive over enemy airfields at precisely calculated times. Lieutenant Robert Holden demonstrated the tactic's effectiveness on April 14, 1945, destroying 3 aircraft over Kanoya Airfield and returning safely despite intense anti-aircraft fire. The Japanese perspective, revealed through post-war interrogations and captured documents, showed growing desperation. Admiral Soimu Toyoda admitted that American night fighters had destroyed our capability for offensive operations after dark. We could neither attack their ships nor defend our bases. The sanctuary of darkness became our tomb. Junior officers reported veteran pilots feigning illness rather than fly night missions, knowing that radar-equipped Hellcats meant almost certain death. VTN-90, the torpedo squadron component of Night Air Group 90, demonstrated that night capabilities extended beyond fighters. Flying radar-equipped TBM-3E Avengers, they conducted night torpedo attacks, mine-laying operations, and even achieved aerial victories. Lieutenant Charles Henderson claimed 4 aircraft destroyed, including a Kawanishi H-8K flying boat, proving that night combat effectiveness was not limited to specialized fighters. The technological progression continued accelerating. Plans existed for F6F-6N variants, with more powerful engines and advanced APS-12 radar, capable of tracking targets at 10 miles. The F4U5N Corsair was entering production with performance exceeding any Japanese aircraft. Jet-powered night fighters were on drawing boards. The atomic bombs that ended the war also ended these development programs, but the foundation for all future night combat aviation had been established. Training accidents provided harsh lessons that improved procedures continuously. The collision of 2 Hellcats over USS Randolph on January 18, 1945, led to mandatory altitude separation for night formations. The loss of Lieutenant Commander Robert Campbell's entire division during night training on December 3, 1944, resulted in new weather minimums for group operations. Each tragedy contributed to institutional knowledge that saved future lives while pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible. Economic analysis revealed surprising efficiency. Despite higher training costs and equipment complexity, night fighters achieved kill ratios exceeding daylight fighters, approximately 18-1 for night fighters versus 11-1 for day fighters by 1945. The psychological impact reduced enemy operations more effectively than attrition alone. Investment in night fighter capability multiplied returns, validating those who had championed the program despite initial skepticism and bureaucratic resistance. The cultural transformation within naval aviation was profound. Night fighter pilots, initially viewed with suspicion by traditional squadrons, earned respect through demonstrated effectiveness. Their specialized skills, instrument flying, radar interpretation, radio coordination, became mandatory for all naval aviators post-war. The night fighter campaign had proven that modern air combat required technical proficiency, equaling or exceeding traditional flying skills. The cowboy era of intuitive flying was ending. The age of the systems operator had begun. Logistics supporting night operations were immense. Radar sets required specialized maintenance by electronics technicians rather than traditional mechanics. Spare parts traveled thousands of miles across the Pacific, protected from corrosive salt air. Special red light bulbs, radar scopes, electronic components, each required separate supply chains. The success of night fighters represented logistics triumph as much as tactical innovation. On May 13, 1945, VFN 41 achieved a milestone when Lieutenant J.E. Smith became the squadron's fifth ace, with 7 confirmed night victories. This concentration of expertise in a single squadron, 5 aces among 14 pilots, demonstrated the lethal efficiency achieved through specialized training and superior equipment. By comparison, Japanese night fighter units, lacking radar and adequate training, rarely achieved even single victories against American bombers. The influence extended beyond naval aviation. Marine Night Fighter Squadron V, MFN 513, trained by Navy instructors and equipped with Navy-developed radar, achieved remarkable success from shore bases. Army Air Force squadrons adopted Navy procedures and equipment, reversing the typical inter-service rivalry. The night fighter campaign had created a brotherhood of pilots who shared unique skills transcending service boundaries. Environmental factors unique to the Pacific required constant adaptation. Tropical thunderstorms could destroy aircraft as effectively as enemy fighters. Bioluminescent plankton stirred by ship wakes revealed fleet positions to alert enemies. The vast distances meant fuel management often determined mission success more than combat skill. Each factor required specific tactical adaptations accumulating into comprehensive doctrine applicable worldwide. The final months of war saw American night dominance so complete that Japanese naval aviation essentially abandoned nocturnal operations. VFN 103, aboard USS Bon Homme Richard, flew patrols in July 1945 without encountering any enemy aircraft. None dared fly after dark. The transformation from helpless victims of Washing Machine Charlie to absolute masters of darkness had taken less than 2 years, a revolution in military affairs comparable to the introduction of radar itself. On July 29, 1945, Lieutenant Robert Holden of VFN 91 conducted what would be the final night fighter engagement of the Pacific War. Intercepting a Yokosuka P-1Y reconnaissance aircraft attempting to photograph the invasion fleet, Holden pursued for 7 minutes through violent evasive maneuvers that would have succeeded against any daylight fighter. But radar maintained lock throughout, and his guns found their mark. The Francis plunged into the ocean, taking with it the last remnants of Japanese night aviation capability. Statistical analysis was staggering. Between April 1943 and August 1945, American carrier-based night fighters claimed 579 confirmed aerial victories against 32 operational losses, a kill ratio of 18-1. Japanese night operations, which had tormented American forces throughout 1942 and early 1943, had been so thoroughly suppressed that personnel arriving in theatre after mid-1944 never experienced night attacks. The psychological warfare Japan had wielded effectively for 2 years had been turned against them with devastating efficiency. Post-war evaluation by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that night fighters had contributed disproportionately to the collapse of Japanese air power. By denying enemy forces the sanctuary of darkness, American fighters compressed Japanese operations into daylight hours where they faced overwhelming numerical and qualitative superiority. The psychological impact was equally significant. Japanese pilots, knowing that neither darkness nor weather offered protection, suffered morale collapse manifesting in increased accidents, desertions, and refusal to fly combat missions. Individual courage of night fighter pilots deserved special recognition. Flying alone into hostile darkness, beyond help range, required particular bravery. Unlike daylight fighters who could see threats approaching, night fighter pilots lived in constant uncertainty, never knowing whether the next radar contact was enemy or friendly, whether their next landing would be successful or fatal. The accident rate for night operations remained triple that of daylight throughout the war, yet volunteers never wavered. Commander Caldwell's Night Air Group 41 exemplified this dedication. In 7 months of combat from Independence, the squadron flew 1,743 sorties, logged 4,892 combat hours, claimed 46 aerial victories. 5 pilots became aces, including Lieutenant William Henry, with 7 victories despite being shot down twice and spending 18 hours in life rafts. The squadron's loss rate of 27% was considered acceptable by night fighter standards, testament to extraordinary dangers these pioneers faced nightly. The technological legacy extended far beyond military applications. Miniaturized radar systems developed for night fighters enabled civilian aviation to operate safely in all weather conditions. Precise navigation techniques required for night intercepts contributed to modern air traffic control development. Even red lighting preserving night vision became standard in applications from astronomy to medicine. The night fighter campaign had driven innovation benefiting all humanity. The broader implications for military doctrine were profound and lasting. Night fighting demonstrated that technological superiority could completely overturn traditional military advantages. The Japanese Navy had spent decades developing night combat expertise, selecting and training personnel specifically for darkness operations. American forces, starting from zero capability in early 1943, achieved absolute dominance within 18 months through superior equipment and adaptive doctrine. The lesson was clear. In modern warfare, technological adaptation trumped traditional expertise. Leadership at squadron level proved crucial. Lieutenant Commander Russell Reiserer, who later commanded VFN 76, instituted rigorous training requiring each pilot to complete 50 practice intercepts before attempting combat missions. His insistence on perfection before engagement resulted in his squadron achieving 23 victories without a single operational loss to enemy action, an unprecedented achievement in aerial combat. This emphasis on thorough preparation became standard throughout night fighter squadrons. The industrial foundation of success extended beyond radar manufacturing. Grumman modified production lines to accommodate night fighter variants without disrupting daylight fighter output. Specialized training aircraft were developed, including radar-equipped SNJ trainers with hooded cockpits for instrument practice. Even seemingly minor items like luminous instrument paint required industrial mobilization that Japan, with its resource constraints and damaged infrastructure, could not match. Weather's role as force multiplier for American night fighters cannot be overstated. During the Philippines campaign, monsoon conditions grounded Japanese aircraft for weeks, while radar-equipped Hellcats continued operations. This all-weather capability meant American carriers could maintain continuous pressure regardless of conditions, while Japanese forces remained paralyzed by weather that had traditionally provided operational pauses. The evolution from defensive to offensive night operations marked strategic maturation. Instead of waiting for Japanese attacks, American night fighters hunted enemy aircraft at their bases. Operation Gratitude on July 25, 1945, saw 32 night fighters destroy 29 Japanese aircraft, 18 on the ground, 11 airborne, effectively eliminating night capability from an entire sector. Such operations would have been impossible without radar navigation and precise timing enabled by advanced equipment. Communication advances proved as important as radar. By 1945, American night fighters operated with 4 radio frequencies, one for ship control, one for division coordination, one for emergency, and one for landing approach. This redundancy ensured continuous contact despite equipment failures or enemy jamming attempts. Japanese forces, limited to single frequencies often shared between units, suffered communications chaos during night operations. Maintenance evolution paralleled operational advancement. By war's end, specialized night fighter maintenance units could perform complete radar overhauls aboard ship, capability unimaginable 2 years earlier. Chief Aviation Machinist's mate Robert Chen of VFN-90 developed field modifications improving radar reliability by 40%, innovations rapidly disseminated throughout the fleet. Such grassroots innovation, encouraged by command structure, continuously improved capabilities. The Pacific distances created unique challenges. Night fighters often operated at maximum range, requiring precise fuel management. Lieutenant Donald Patterson of VFN-41 perfected economy cruise settings that extended range by 20%, allowing deeper penetrations into enemy territory. These techniques, shared through squadron newsletters and training programs, exemplified the continuous improvement culture that characterized American night fighter development. Cultural impact on Japanese forces was devastating. Post-war interviews revealed that night fighter effectiveness had convinced many Japanese pilots that Americans possessed supernatural abilities, seeing in darkness, reading minds, appearing from nowhere. This psychological defeat, beyond mere tactical losses, contributed to broader collapse of Japanese military morale. The technological superiority had created mythology that transcended rational explanation. Marine Captain Marion Carl, visiting Navy night fighter squadrons in 1945, observed, "The Navy has created something entirely new, warriors who fight in a realm where traditional combat skills are useless. These pilots operate more like submariners than fighter pilots, hunting by instrument, killing without seeing their victims. It's simultaneously impressive and unsettling." The economic efficiency of night fighters validated investment. Analysis showed that each night fighter ace had prevented approximately 50 tons of bombs from reaching American forces, damage prevention exceeding the cost of entire squadrons. The sleep preservation alone, allowing thousands of personnel to rest without harassment, provided combat effectiveness improvements impossible to quantify, but universally acknowledged as decisive. Final operations demonstrated complete mastery. VFN 91's last combat patrol on August 14, 1945, flew over Japanese home islands without encountering opposition. Enemy aircraft remained grounded rather than face certain destruction from invisible predators. The transformation from victims to victors was complete. What had begun with desperate attempts to stop Washing Machine Charlie had evolved into absolute ownership of darkness. The legacy influenced military aviation for generations. Korean War night operations built directly on Pacific experience. Vietnam's night campaigns used procedures developed over Guadalcanal and Leyte. Modern stealth aircraft, designed for undetected penetration of enemy airspace, trace conceptual ancestry to radar-equipped Hellcats that first made darkness an American domain. The revolution begun in 1943 continues shaping aerial warfare today. Admiral John S. McCain, Jr., reflecting on the campaign, observed, "We entered the war unable to defend against even primitive night harassment. We ended it with such complete mastery that enemy pilots preferred capture to flying after dark. This transformation, achieved in less than 2 years during wartime conditions, represents one of the most remarkable adaptations in military history. The human dimension remained paramount despite technological emphasis. Each victory represented individual courage, pilots alone in darkness, beyond help, trusting instruments and training against every survival instinct. Lieutenant William Crawford, on his 23rd birthday, spent 14 hours in shark-infested waters after a night engagement. Lieutenant Robert Murray landed his severely damaged Hellcat blind after enemy fire destroyed his canopy and instruments. Ensign James Patterson caught the last arresting wire with his tailhook partially severed, stopping feet from disaster. Each story testified to extraordinary courage matching technological innovation. As dawn broke on August 15, 1945, Lieutenant Commander Winston led the final night fighter patrol of World War II. His Hellcat circled above Task Force 38, radar scanning empty skies for enemies who no longer came. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Less than 28 months earlier, American forces had cowered helplessly under Japanese night attacks, exhausted and demoralized by an enemy they could neither see nor stop. Now, as morning light revealed defeated Japan, American night fighters owned the darkness so completely that enemy pilots chose death over encountering them. The statistics told only part of the story. Yes, 579 victories against 32 losses was remarkable. Yes, 14 squadrons from 0 in 2 years represented extraordinary expansion. But the true victory was psychological and doctrinal. America had proven that technological innovation, properly applied, could overturn any traditional military advantage. The nation that better integrated science with warfare would prevail, regardless of warrior tradition or individual courage. In the pre-dawn darkness of August 15, 1945, the radar scope in Winston's Hellcat showed nothing but empty sky. The Japanese pilots who had once terrorized American forces with impunity were gone, destroyed not just physically but psychologically by an enemy that had transformed their sanctuary into a hunting ground. The revolution was complete. The night belonged to America, and with it the future of aerial warfare had been forever transformed.